6 different careers in their lifetime. Now that sounds amazing. Some people think of having 6 different jobs, but 6 different careers, many of which that have not been invented as of now. So I'm somewhat like that. I probably have had several different careers, and a little bit of my background. I started out of MBA school at Texas Instruments in Dallas and was in various electronics and telecommunications companies, Fortune 500 senior financial executive. And then I joined the government in the 1980s and was director of grants and contracts and a couple other senior executive positions there with the Department of Education. And then I ended up in the seminary, and I also do financial consulting. So I'm one of those examples of, you might say, lifetime learning and multiple professions and careers. And I think that's going to become more common now. Toffler in his book, Future Shock and the Third Wave, talked about even people doing snippets of their time, 15-minute segments of their time, and providing those over the internet and selling those, or their career might be made up of that. So we're in a different world today, and my background, and I'm sure all the students there, their backgrounds, when they look back on their careers, they're going to be very similar. They're going to have a lot of diversity in their types of jobs. So you want to be prepared for that. You want to know what you're really good at, what you really like to do, and be flexible. That's a big word for today, is being flexible and adaptable. So with that, I think we can go ahead and start the presentation, Elena, if that would be good.
Excellent. Let me get that up on my screen for everyone. So, okay. Sorry, just wanted to test it out really quick. One moment. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. And again, this is so we can all see the PowerPoint. So if anybody has an issue seeing the PowerPoint, please note it in the chat box. I did adjust the settings so that you can chat publicly. Apologies if you were trying before. All right, here we go. And so, okay. Hopefully everybody, Claire, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the PowerPoint slide? All right, so Raymond, you are good to go.
All right, so a short title is College Success and Why Do We Start Early? Why are we doing planning? Part of our purpose, if you look at the next slide, is we want to help families achieve academic, vocational, and life goals. And also, of course, to qualify for the most financial aid to save money on college. We start early. Many times when we have an 8th grade student, but if you'd ask me, I guess as soon as you get married and you have kids is a good time to start thinking about planning for college for those students. I gave you a little bit of my background, and the next slide. There we go. There's a little bit about me, and you can see I've ended up with a couple of different degrees, and I hadn't planned it that way, but that's the way life is going. And I think many of the students there, they're going to have that in their life. They're going to end up maybe getting advanced degrees, and maybe after a couple of years, a degree or certification in another field. So that, I think, will become more common as time goes on. So now we're going to talk about coronavirus. It seems like everything is about coronavirus these last couple of weeks. So how's it going to affect us? We probably don't know totally how it's going to affect us. Today, we're certainly going to probably have more concerns about college and our health. We're washing our hands and social distancing more than ever. We know that there are going to be financial and safety challenges. There already are. So people will be losing jobs in this economy. There'll be restructuring of industry and jobs, and people may even move in the country to different locations where those positions are available. And I bet you we're going to be doing a lot more work in social media and on the internet, probably with distance learning. One of the blessings of my career is I worked on the first internet in the classroom project in America, probably in the world. And we were speculating at the time, how would technology be used? And one of the things, this is the early 1990s, that we would do a lot of distance learning. Well, it's taken a while, but that's advancing. And for many of you, that may become a bigger and bigger option. Some of the students today are finishing their grade school classes over distance learning. You're going to see that more on the university level as well. So some colleges, because of this coronavirus, may not be able to give as much financial aid. Others, because of this crisis, they're going to dig a little bit deeper, and they know that their students and families are going to need more financial aid, and they're perhaps going to be more generous. What this does point us towards is a need for greater planning and really sound planning. The world has changed. At the time of 9/11 in 2001, a senior executive told me that what that represented in 9/11 was a wormhole in time. What does that mean? Usually time progresses from point A to point B to point C, etc. But a wormhole is where you're at point A and all of a sudden you end up in point H all in one jump. So our world will be significantly different because of this. And we don't know all the ways, but we do know that we're going to have to be pragmatic. We're going to have to be flexible and adaptable. The time of the Great Depression, both of my grandfathers had to change careers because of the economic disruption. And both of them had to do some moving and adapting and using their skills in a different way. It wasn't necessarily the same jobs, but it was figuring out with their aptitudes and their backgrounds, how could they get a different type of job? And they both did well, but certainly a lot of struggles during that time. So I know we're going to face a lot of struggles, but also where there's struggles, there's going to be lots of opportunities. Now, college is a huge life event. A couple of years ago, it's still a huge life event. Now it's probably a little bit greater. Now, doesn't mean that we have to be anxious. And the way to avoid a lot of the anxieties is by good planning, going through the issues in advance and saying, just like they do in war games, how are we going to face this obstacle or that obstacle? And having at least a preliminary game plan. This is how we're going to proceed. Here's some examples of being a big life event. Students are going away from home, sometimes for the first time. They're going to be developing their skills and future careers in life. It may be for them their largest financial expenditure, at least for the family. If certain kinds of mistakes can mean a lot of extra effort and lots of extra years of college. It could be a lot of extra expenses and maybe unhappy careers. So sometimes people graduate and they go into a career and then all of a sudden they say, oh, I don't like this at all. I don't like this career. I wish I was something else. And then they may have to go back for more education, repeat years of college that they might not have been able, or they might not have had to repeat if they had gotten a better gauge on what they're good at and what their interests are in life. So let's look at some of the changes. I just picked a year, 1980. So in 1980, a student that was going to college, the tuition was pretty low. Today, in most of the major universities, the tuition is pretty high. Cost of attendance is pretty high. The process was sort of moderate. You had some forms, you did this and that, you filled them out. It wasn't that big a deal. Today, there's a lot of different forms. Some of them are common applications, but you're going to be doing maybe lots of different essays, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be very difficult and complex. Acceptances in 1980, much more likely to get into college. A lot of the institutions today are hard or difficult to get into. In 1980, many times the majors were somewhat flexible. Today, your choice of majors may be critical to getting out in 4 years or getting into the graduate school later that you want to get into. Loans in 1980 were relatively moderate or maybe non-existent. Maybe you could, through having a job and parents, be able to pay for college. And now they can be pretty oppressive, pretty high, and students are having trouble repaying them. Stress, let's say, was moderate, and now today, unfortunately, a lot of the students are pretty anxious and stressed out as the whole process. So one of the real wonderful things that we do is try to reduce that stress and anxiety at Bright Futures. It could be your biggest expense, so let's look at that. Not that I'm recommending this, but if you had a heart bypass with no insurance, it might cost you, say, $200,000 raising a kid to age 18, about $250,000. Medium home price, also about $250,000. Now here's something, Ivy League college, 4 years with no financial aid, $315,000. Wow, it's more than any of those other ones. And a bachelor's degree with an MBA at an Ivy League college, $525,000. Now those are sort of scary numbers. And certainly what we do is we work with clients, so they pay a lot less than that. So that's one of the major things we do on the financial side, is avoid having to pay that kind of money. Why has this happened? Well, it's inflation. So we used to talk about in the 80s quite a lot of inflation and 10%, 12%. Now they barely have 2%. But there's been a differential. Consumer prices in the last about 27 years have doubled. Medical costs have tripled. Tuition has quintupled. It's gone up by 5 times. And you wonder why that is. And one of my bosses one time was Secretary Bill Bennett. He's on a lot of the talk shows nowadays. And Secretary Bennett wrote a book, Is College Worth It? And there he identified one of the big costs is they're adding to bureaucracy in the colleges. More and more services, college services, bigger and bigger buildings, marble palaces, and that adds to the tuition costs for the student. So it's just a reality. All the colleges want to be the most prestigious and most luxurious with the gourmet food, etc. But that means that the costs go way up. Some things to know before we go into college. We want to know the student. So that's why we do the Berkman. We want the student to know, the students to know themselves very well, and the parents to understand who the students are. Secondly, we want to understand their finances, and also what's the likely cost of attendance at the schools that are on their select list. So knowing your student, what's that all about? Next chart. Go one more. So the best you begins with self-understanding, which is you. So that's why we do the Berkman at Bright Futures. And we realize that if the personality, school, and vocational matches are not right, the costs are going to soar. I mentioned about having to go back and take extra years of college because there's a mismatch and the person's not having the training and the college background they really need for their desired vocations. So we position our students for success. We do that, next chart, academically, intellectually, musically, artistically, athletically, and we also look globally, not just at the student's school. So this is now a global economy, it's a global pandemic, and it's global education. So we're really competing, we're interfacing, we're relating to, we're trading with people in countries all over the world today. So we work with, you all work with us to do the planning on your high school courses, resume development, SAT prep, college essays, et cetera, and we do this to prepare and to save on time, money, and stress, and also to get you the best outcomes. So what about selecting the right college for you and your student? What's that all about? Next chart we see, it's on college fit. Does the college have the academics, the majors, the programs? What about the size? Some students really do better at smaller schools, some medium size, some can do very well at large school. What about distance? Distance from your current home. Some students, they want to go on one of the coasts. Maybe they don't want to go to NYU now because of Corona in New York, but some people do. They want to go on one of the coasts. They don't want to be in Texas. Others really want to be in Texas or relatively close. Do they want a co-ed school or one that's primarily for men or primarily for women? What about the campus life, the quality of life factors? You get your gourmet food in there, your luxury apartment or whatever it is, or maybe you want a very Spartan one that doesn't cost that much. Your personality aptitude needs. Sometimes it's a religious school, and we have students that really want to go to a school that's in their own denomination or very similar. They want certain kind of training and environment. Students may need special accommodations. There are colleges we help people with because they have certain learning issues and they need a certain type of college. So we have lists of those. So determining college fit's very important. Now I'm going to talk mostly about finances. Know your family finances. So why is that important? We'll go on the next chart. Families have a diversity of that. And you see an example there where the student ability is very high and their income is medium level, assets medium level. Well, that would call forth in my book, when I work with a family like that, a certain kind of strategy. But you could see there could be 27 different types, 3 times 3 times 3. So you get to have a family that has high income, low assets, medium student ability. That would be a different type. And they would have a fundamentally different strategy in approaching saving on college and having the best result in that way. So I'm going to look at 4 different types of families. So here's one. Their income, let's say, is relatively low, family income, 40,000 or less, and maybe limited assets. And that family would undoubtedly qualify for federal aid in the terms of Pell Grants, and probably a lot of institutional aid as well. Great students are likely to get merit and need-based aid. So not only would they get a lot of financial aid, they would also get some great grants probably and merit aid based on their ability and their grades, their SAT, ACT scores, and special aptitudes maybe that they have. And in this situation, a family really would have a strategy of using the community resources and the aid. So you would figure out what colleges are going to give the student the best environment, but also a lot of aid, because the family is going to need a lot of aid. They're not going to be able to pay very much in terms of their expected family contribution. And here's another example, lower middle. Let's say they have income of 40,000, 80,000, and less than 40,000 in non-retirement assets. Again, here's one where they're probably going to get a lot of institutional aid depending on the college. They were going to be invited to get sort of student loans. Many of those will be subsidized. That is, the interest won't accrue while they're in college, and they'll get a better rate. And but still, the parents probably have very limited loan capacity. And if the student has pretty high scores and background, they're going to be getting merit aid, which will help quite a bit. Then we look at a middle income family, I'll just call it today, 80,000, 130,000, depending on the institution and the costs of the college. They may get need-based aid, particularly if they're going to a private college, private school. May get some merit-based aid depending on the student's background. And then they're both student and parent loans. Plus means parent loans. And of course, the parents are responsible to make sure they get paid, whereas the student loans, the student is responsible to make sure they get paid. And then we have, let's call it upper income. It doesn't seem like that today for many families, but 130,000 plus. They may get some need-based aid if both their income and their assets are well positioned. I help people with that. There may be some tax-free strategies to save money on college. Cash flow planning is usually very important with all of the types of families. You know, how much money is going to be needed out of the families and the student's pocket? When is it going to be needed? And is that a viable plan? And if not, we need to change some things in the equation and our choices. Merit-based scholarship, but families with higher income usually have greater loan capacity. So those are some advantages there. Now here's a concept, and those of you who are going to be business majors, you're going to get into this quite a bit. It's called return on investment. So what's return on investment? Well, it's basically, I hate to use all these expressions, but discounted present value, difference between the income you're going to get from your career versus all the costs that you're going to pay to get that kind of degree or certification or experience. Now, I've known a lot of actually very, very rich people, super rich people in this country. And there's a common factor that I ran into. One factor is they wanted good quality in whatever it was, but they didn't want to overpay. They didn't get rich by overpaying. They wanted good products, good services, but you don't want to pay too much. And that's the general concept here. The book I mentioned by Secretary Bennett, Is College Worth It?, goes through that and says, if you get a degree from a certain college and you spend a certain amount of money to go to that college, what kind of return are you going to get on that? Now, of course, it's not just the financial return. So there are a lot of returns that we look at. You know, do you really love a profession? Even if you're not making very much money, if you really love it, that may be where you need to be and go into that profession. But we do want to compare colleges. So let's take an example with law schools. Today, it's sort of hard out of law school to get a job as a lawyer. Usually only the top schools can you get a job in the law profession using your background. Otherwise, you may end up being like a clerk or doing paralegal work, but you had intentions of being a lawyer. So in that case, you're probably better off to go to a more prestigious college if you're going to be a lawyer, because you're much more likely to get into the profession as a full-time lawyer. Now, when the Department of Education looked at, and still does look at, what's the value of getting a bachelor's degree or master's degree, over a lifetime, bachelor's degrees versus someone with just a high school diploma, it's probably $600,000 more over a lifetime. Master's degree, it's more like $900,000 or more. So there are advantages to advanced degrees depending on the major and the vocation. And then, as I mentioned before, you want to consider your quality of life and your job satisfaction. Sometimes people take jobs that don't pay quite as much, but they have greater quality of life. So that is a good choice. But then you'd also want to say, well, how much do I want to pay on my college experience? Maybe I want to pay a little bit less because I'm going to take a type of job that doesn't have quite as much financial reward, but maybe it has other kinds of rewards in life. Now, knowing what the likely cost of attendance is. So one of the ways that we do that, and this has been made available, pretty much all the colleges have it. Department of Education encourages this. And in fact, you see a website there that you can go to and you can look at a college and you can get all sorts of data about that college. One caveat I give to people is some of the colleges in the East or the West Coast look like they're better results, but you also have to understand that it's probably weighted towards students that remain in what I call high cost of living states. So you'll need a much bigger income if you're going to live in one of those high cost of living states. And you want to be thinking about apples to apples comparison. and look at, maybe someone in Iowa wouldn't need as huge of a income, but could do much better in terms of house and community and lifestyle. So those are all things to take into account. So don't just go for the college that has the greatest return in terms of the average salaries of the students that come out in the first couple of years. So cost of attendance is a formula, and you're going to get copies of presentations. It's tuition, fees, room and board, transportation, books, personal items, etc. And then your aid would be scholarships, grants, loans, work study opportunities. So you make some money to offset your costs. So a net cost of attendance is the total cost minus those other scholarships and aids and job opportunities to get your net cost of attendance. So look at the next chart and you see here's some comparisons locally, not so, one of them's not that local, but San Jacinto Community College did very, very rough numbers, a couple $1,000s a year, not very high. A&M is now about 30,000. Of course, there's variety depending what programs you're in, et cetera, where they have a lot of lab expenses. Baylor, 65, Rice, 67. Yale is $78,000 a year. Well, I multiply that by 4, that's a lot of money. Any of those multiplied by 4 is a lot of money. And if you don't have a plan that's going to work for you, you might be going 5 years to that same institution, or maybe 6 years. So that's why Benjamin Franklin used to say, measure twice, cut once. So you want to plan well and do the best you can. It's never going to be perfect. The best you can to figure out what majors and experiences you need to be successful with your life goals. Some types of forms that you're going to fill out. Now, if you're going to a public institution only, it's likely that the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. So when I was at the Department of Education, we worked on that, and every year they change the form slightly and they change the rules a little bit and this and that. But generally for public schools, the FAFSA was used. Now, if you're going to private schools or you're going to apply to private schools, you're likely to also fill out the CSS profile. And that's put out by the College Board that also puts out the SAT. And that has different questions and different formulas and looks at slightly different items in terms of assets and income and family. Estimating your expected family contribution. Well, what's the expected family contribution? That's a derivative. It says basically what's the cost of attendance. Remember, that's the tuition and fees and room and board and transportation, personal items, et cetera, for college. And then it subtracts all the types of aid, and it says that this is what this family ought to be able to pay. Now, the truth is, your expected family contribution may end up being higher than the formula says, because your college doesn't necessarily give you 100% of the aid that the formula would say they should give. So there are a lot of colleges that don't equal up, so to speak, with the type of aid that the formula would say you should be able to get. And some of the aid's going to be loans. So you might say, well, with a loan, I've got to pay that back. And yes, that's true, but they still consider that aid, financial aid that you're receiving, if they give you federal loans or other types of loans. The FAFSA considers your income, the family, your assets, investments, also the size of your family, the age of your family, that is the parents, siblings that are in college, and the student's finances. So the income and assets of the student is also included. FAFSA excludes the home equity, retirement assets, and certain small business financials. So That would be something about FAFSA in particular. And CSS profile is much more comprehensive and includes a lot of other things, like home equity. They can look at that. They can look at your retirement assets and say, well, you know, these people really have a lot of retirement assets. They can't directly tap that without paying a penalty, but we don't feel so sorry for them to give them a lot of extra aid because they've got tons of money in retirement assets. And they may also look more closely at the businesses. Here's 4 case studies. And you can see, here's an example of a student where the family's AGI, adjusted gross income, that's one of the lines on the tax return, is $60,000. The parent net worth about $40,000 of assets. And in this case, in this particular year, they would get $1,800 in Pell Grants. They might get $38,000 in college grants, $2,000 work study, $5,500 in loans, maybe a little bit more. And their expected family contribution is $4,900. Well, a family that has $60,000 income and $40,000 in net worth, $4,900 a year is still for them a pretty big amount of money to pay for college compared to what they've been paying for high school. And this would be a case where the cost of attendance, all the costs are $50,000. Now you saw some of those private ones, they're in the 70s now, 70,000 or 60 a year. Second student number 2, higher adjusted gross income, the assets, the net worth of the family, that's excluding retirement accounts, is about $250,000. They're not going to be getting any Pell Grants. They might get a college grant, work study offered, some loans. Their expected family contribution is $31,300. Now, one of the things I really help people with is getting that expected family contribution down. So I understand the formulas and how they work and what people can do to qualify for more financial aid. It's $31,000 a year. Really, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for a family that's making $116,000, and maybe they got some other kids and siblings. So let's look at the next chart. And this is my warning: mistakes can be costly. I don't know if many of you realize what that is. That's a cruise liner, picture of a cruise liner. That's the Concordia, and it's off of Italy. And the mistake was that the captain was trying to show off to his girlfriend who's on the shore, and he got too close and he hit the rocks. And very, very costly, both in lives and expenses. Well, we don't expect anyone to die from college, but you know, knowing where you're going and why you're going there and what the surroundings are is very, very important. So here's some costly mistakes to avoid. Not knowing who the student is or their purpose. So that's why we spend a lot of time with Berkman and work with the families to understand who the student is. And the student really should think about, you know, who am I? How has God wired me? What do I really like to do? Maybe shadow some professionals to see if the student likes that profession before they go in and major in something for that. The students that fail to plan for academics, they don't get the right core courses they need to prepare them for college. Of course, that's a problem. If they don't look at the finances and figure out who their family is and what's going to work well. And if they don't get a good fit with a college, all those are costly mistakes. Also, when I'm working with clients, I want to talk to them before they fill out FAFSA and CSS. Because I've had some clients, they fill them out and then they come to me and say, oh my goodness, we didn't like the result that we got. The expected family contribution is so high. And then I have to tell them, well, you know, you've put your numbers in there. You can correct the mistakes, but all of those mistakes are going to be reported to all the colleges. So if you said we had $250,000 of assets, and all of a sudden your next one, you say we have 100,000 of assets, everyone's going to be a little suspicious. Well, did they do that just because they didn't like the expected family contribution, or what kind of mistake resulted in $150,000 being overstated? So you don't want to go in and fill out the form before you somewhat know what the answer is going to be. And that's what I try to help people with. Not applying for affordable colleges. So we have some clients and they get into their a lovely college that they think is going to be great, but they really haven't checked the numbers. And then they get in and they go, oh my goodness, we really can't afford this. Now what are we going to do? They're not giving us enough financial aid, and we don't have a college on the backup plan that's affordable. Or I've had some clients, they're 2 years into college. Now another student is coming forward from the family, and they're like, oh my goodness, we can't afford the second student now. Well, that's why we want to get good cash flow numbers. We want to look at how many other students are coming forward, anything that's affecting the finances of the family. Taking on too much debt. Well, you've read about that, I'm sure. Millennials that can't buy a car, can't buy a house, can't get married, can't maybe even afford a dog. So that's a problem. People aren't too happy when they have huge financial responsibilities and loans, and they're wondering how long is it going to take to pay this off. So we look at that too. Not navigating around college pitfalls. So there are pitfalls in college, and we can talk more about that at another time, but things that you need to avoid in the college experience. So planning early, next chart, and an excellent fit dramatically cut costs. So I've seen a lot of cases with our clients where they've gone to a private school and they get 50% of the cost off. So with good planning and a good match, a good fit, that's not unusual to save half the cost. So if the private college is costing $60,000, it may be for a family, we can get the cost down to $30,000 or less. And that's huge, because that's a savings pretty much every year that they do. How can financial consultants help you? Well, this is a pretty complex process. It's not as cheap as it used to be in terms of going to college, but there are a lot of complexities because you have to look at not only the financial planning, the investments the family has, the type of taxes they pay, insurance, annuities, estate planning, the family finances of the larger family, maybe with grandparents, understanding what's going on there. Also, budgets. A lot of families don't use budgets. They get enough money in and they think, well, we don't really need one. We're fine. But when you go to college, things are changing. And whereas budgets may not have been important before, they often are very much during the college years. And college financial consultants help plan the finances for college and maximize your aid of all types. So we want to do that. We want to get the most financial aid that the family and the student are qualified for. And another point that I made very early in the presentation, we want to do this. Generally, you start years in advance. So when we start to make a good plan, it's usually when people are saying, college is years away. And what I found is the closer we are to the student going into college, the fewer opportunities there are to save on college. So your maximum savings are by starting early and planning early and getting the things set up so that you will qualify for the most financial aid and have the best experience and the best match with your life goals and aspirations. Some of the other things that we do, we identify your type of family, your best strategy. Remember, there are 27 types of those. We'll recommend asset and income repositioning to qualify for more financial aid. I help families avoid pitfalls in filling out the forms, and recommend some scholarship opportunities. Also look at the cash flow. As I said, that's very important, particularly if there are multiple students that are going to be going to college. and where maybe the family hasn't had to live on a pretty tight budget before. So the bottom line is we want to save money on college, but get you the best experience and the best fit. So we look at how do we do that? We plan now, and now is the time to start planning, and I'm available to do that. Here's some information on me, which will be part of the presentation. You can call me on my cell phone number, my email address is there. And then, of course, with Bright Futures, there are all sorts of other services that you're probably looking at and utilizing with Bright Futures to help you in all the other areas of college planning and the reality of getting in. Also, I work, by the way, with families after they've gotten their financial aid to get them more financial aid. So they get their financial aid package, and for me, that's just a starting point because we want to do better than that. So one way to secure services from me is you can purchase that on our website, a very basic package where I look over your expected family contribution and recommendations for saving on college. And I do a 1 hour live consulting with you after I've done all the researches on your financials. And I have a form you fill out and gives me a lot of information that I do my research based on. Then there's also extended packages. So when I have families that need more help with FAFSA and CSS and appeals of financial aid, etc., there's another package for that. It's $900. Now I think we're ready for, thank you very much for listening, for your questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Raymond. So I'm actually going to turn the floor over to Claire and Raymond. Claire's been monitoring the chat, the messages, and has kind of gathered up some questions. And we also had other clients who emailed questions prior to the presentation. So Raymond, if you're ready, I will go ahead and unmute Claire.
I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Claire.
Hi. Great to see some familiar faces, names, of course, some of my clients who are listening on this presentation. Raymond, one of the questions that kind of came up in different formats in the chat, and then as I was thinking about, having worked with students on the admission side, is when, first of all, maybe give a quick rundown, or maybe not so quick, but like a basic rundown of submitting the FAFSA and or CSS profile. The timeline for that, I just want to let everybody know the timeline for that can be different for every school you apply for, but generally a couple years ago it was moved up to the fall. So if your student is working to complete a November 1st, November 15th, December 1st deadline, parents, that's when you'll want to get your FAFSA or CSS profile or both of those documents into the admission office.
Let me talk about that.
The financials that will be considered when you're filling out those forms, the number that you'll use will be based on the prior year, so 2 years prior to your student entering into the college. So that's the timeline piece on that. Raymond, do you want to elaborate a little bit on what other documents or things families might need to have ready in order to complete the FAFSA?
Yeah, so FAFSA and CSS, just sort of a little background on that. Department of Education, when I worked there, we always wanted to make things not only easy for the people in the public, but also easy for the people at the Department of Education. So in the last couple of years, we went to prior year for tax returns. So let's say the 2020-21, someone who'd be going to school in the fall of 2020, all right? So we would be using the 2018 tax return. Why is that helpful? Well, it's helpful because by that time, most everyone's filed their 2018 tax return. So it's available. And that can be populated from the IRS. So in the middle of the FAFSA, there's an opportunity to automatically populate it. And that avoids a lot of mistakes. And also, you might say a little bit of conflict where parents were filling in numbers and they didn't match the tax returns. So we wanted to avoid, government wants to avoid any discrepancies. So they can download basically the numbers for the tax items from the IRS. So that's capability of FAFSA. That's very helpful. For CSS, and when you can start doing that, let's say for the term 2020, 2021, you could have done that starting October 1st of 2019. So it's going to be the fall, almost, you might say a year before you're actually going to go to college. That October, a year before, October 1st, you're going to have the opportunity to fill out the FAFSA. Now you have several more months, but I don't even want to talk about that. I urge my clients to fill it out early because you want to get in line for financial aid. You don't want to wait to the very last minute to turn in your FAFSA and CSS after the college admissions group and their financial aid group have already doled out most of the money. In other words, it's better to be first in line than last in line for financial aid generally. So then you're going to need a couple of years of tax returns for the CSS profile. So for FAFSA, you're only going to need that one tax return, which is 2 years prior. And every year, most of the institutions also require you to file FAFSA. Even if you're a very, very rich family, I recommend that you file that because in many cases, the merit aid doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's true. The merit aid that's offered through the college may not be available to you if you did not fill out FAFSA. So virtually all families should fill out FAFSA. And the CSS profile, as I said, most private colleges are going to require you to fill that out. You're going to need a couple of years of tax returns for that, and also an estimate of the current year and a future year. And those can be, of course, conservative. You don't have to overestimate how much of a bonus you might, mom and dad might get at the workplace. But they want much more in terms of years of financial information and much more extensive financial information. So a college actually can ask any financial aid question they want to. And I've had some that said, how many cars do you have? What kind of cars are they? When did you pay for them? What do you think they're worth now? And the reason for that is because people have tried to hide some of their assets. So let's say they had $250,000 in assets and they didn't want that to be figured in terms of giving them less financial aid. So they went out and bought a Lamborghini. I don't know how much a Lamborghini costs, but let's say it costs $250,000. And so they said, oh, we don't have any non-retirement assets. They're all gone. And then they get to the CSS profile and they say, list all your cars. Oh, well, we've got a 2020 Lamborghini. And they go, oh my goodness, you do. Isn't that special? Well, if you can afford a 2020 Lamborghini, you're not going to get very much financial aid from us. We know what you're doing. You're hiding things in places. And so they can ask all sorts of questions, and some of them do ask very, what I call invasive questions. So CSS profile is a much more complex equation than FAFSA. FAFSA is much more cut and dry. So it is important to plan in advance for both of those.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue to the next question. So what is income or asset repositioning for those families who are on the front end of the 2 years out? Maybe what are the items that are weighted more heavily on the FAFSA? Thinking about maybe rental properties, debt, cash in the bank, and other investments. What are some of the more heavily weighted items?
Yeah, well, a lot of times people think, oh my goodness, we're going to get a lot of financial aid because we have tons of credit card debt. Well, I'm sorry to say they don't ask you about how much credit card debt you have. So if you have lots of credit card debt, we feel really bad about that, but it's not going to help you get financial aid. So things that are going to be weighted pretty heavily is adjusted gross income. And you can look on your tax returns now and you can see what number you had for 2018 or 2019. Let's say if a family is applying for the 2021, 2022 year, you can look at 2019 and see what your adjusted gross income was. And they do look at what you did contribute for your 401k or your IRAs. They consider that also in the equation because adjusted gross income is after retirement contributions. So a family that's able to sock away a lot of money, they want to know that in terms of how much they're able to put in retirement assets, as compared to a family, let's say they have very little in retirement assets and they can't afford to put much in their retirement assets. So a family like that, they might be more generous to in giving out financial aid. So repositioning, sometimes I look at where people have assets that do count more against them. And particularly if it's years in advance, how we can put them in categories that don't count as much. And it's also true between the student and the parents. The assets and income of the student is counted much more heavily than those of the parents. And then you also have to consider siblings too, the overall family situation. And so anyway, so repositioning, looking at the best place for those assets. And by the way, I don't invest anybody's money for them. I don't do that at all. I never touch anyone's money. But I do make recommendations of this is how your financial aid could look better. Now, you might not want to do something because of other reasons, but I try to look at it objectively and say, okay, this would be an opportunity if you want to do X, Y, and Z.
Okay. What are your, do you recommend investing with 529 plans? Are the contributions done in 529 reported in the CSF or FAFSA? Is that considered like student savings, or how does that enter into the formula, the 529?
Yeah, so I read probably the same articles most of the parents read about 529s. And at one point it was like 521s are absolutely the greatest ever. Everybody should do them. That's the way to go. I would say that is an extremely complex matter. It has all sorts of things, implications. It has to do with the other assets that the family has, what other students, whose name the 529 should be in, or should there even be one. And for some families, I say 529s absolutely do not make any sense for you to do. And others, I say this makes perfect sense for you to do. And then the question is also who's the owner of it too. So it's a very complex subject. But unfortunately, when I see articles out there, they're usually talking about one type of family. That's why I said, when I look at it, there's 27 different types of families, but the articles are generally written for one type of family. And that's not the reality of the clients. The clients are many different types of families. And so therefore the answer is going to be different depending on the particularities of the family situation.
So what is the type of family where 529, maybe if you could give an example where that wouldn't be the best route? For a 529.
Well, I'll give an example where it might make a lot of sense. Let's say an extremely wealthy family with lots of income that has almost no hope of financial aid. So that might be an example where 529 would be helpful. So I'll give you that example. For other families,
okay,
there are other ways of doing it rather than 529 that might be more flexible for the family and also might end up with more financial aid. So I also have to look at the bigger family, like what are the grandparents like? What are other family members like that might be helping with college costs?
Yeah. I always was under the impression that if it was in a student's name, it was weighted more heavily. Someone else asked about grandparents who set up a 529. I know that, I mean, I even had a friend recently who was like, should we get 529 set up in our names, you know, as the parents of, you know, our children are little, or if we have it in the student's name, and it is already set up in one way. Is that even something that can be changed at this point? Or what is your take on that?
Well, the
Or
beneficiaries
529?
can be changed. Yeah. So, you know, and sometimes the family will set up a 529 that'll be for the first student. And the first student, let's say, doesn't use all the money. And you can, there's ways to designate that for, say, the second student.
Okay.
So that's a possibility. But again, 529 is only one of many different ways to finance college. So I know it's been like a big thing and been sold a lot. And sometimes I have to tell you, people get into 529 plans and the investment options are just dreadful.
Mm-hmm.
So they would have done better not being in a 529. So all 529.
About that as well. They asked if a 529 versus building your own assets, you know, as a family, or the parents building their own assets. I guess that's something that would be just really personal to the family situation.
Yeah, so 529 is going to be counted. Let's say there's a 529 for $20,000. It's going to be, and it's the parents owns it, and the beneficiary is the student. Okay, versus $20,000 in the bank. They're going to be treated in the formula in the exact same way. Okay. They're not going to be, there's not a benefit. Primarily, the benefit of the 529 is that the assets can accumulate tax-free. That's they accumulate tax-free. And if they're used for college, you're not going to be paying taxes on the gains, the capital gains of the investments. But then again, as I say, they're not all equal because some of the 529 plans, their investments have been just horrible. So, and you also have to get it from an investment point of view as to what types of things should you invest in to assure that not only do you get a good return, but the money is going to be available when the student goes to college. And you tend to get more conservative the closer the student is to enrollment.
Okay. Let's see, I can answer one of these. Lots of good questions popping up. I'm trying to keep track of them on the side of my screen. Someone asked if the FAFSA or CSS profile would take into consideration a family member or a sibling that has a disability. And I know that, at least from my experience in addition, that the information, can you say, is that captured on the FAFSA as far as maybe medical expenses or therapy related to the student's sibling or maybe a family member in their household?
Well, you know, if you have a situation like that, or let's say one family member is really sick or something, so those are going to be special factors. For example, for the CSS profile, you're going to, you know, I help families write a very nice, I'll call it an essay. It's not the other kind of essay, but a nice essay to put in there that explains how that impacts the family and their finances. So that would be a special that we'd want to do, absolutely, to make that available. I can't think offhand in the FAFSA where there's not a box for that, but there is in the CSS profile where you can put factors. And then also after you get the financial aid package, there's an opportunity to go back to the college again with something, particularly if you don't think they took it into account, that you have a family member where, let's say you have $30,000 a year extra expenses for their medical issues or learning disability or something.
Yeah, I know that we would see that on the appeals side. So, right, a student this time of year, but for seniors, they might say, oh, this unique circumstance popped up over the past year or 2 years, and a lot of times our financial aid office would ask the family to provide receipts and kind of proof of that happening. So if that's not something that you're already keeping really good track of and have a manila folder or filing folder in your family's office or wherever you stay organized as a family, I would definitely encourage you to keep that documentation if it's asked. Okay,
Yes,
so
people, by the way, just in general, people with good documentation do so much better. So if you can show costs, if you can show and document, and generally they're going to ask for documentation. They're not, you can't just say, oh, this or that. They're going to see some evidence that you're actually spending money or extra money on something, or there's another consideration. And today, given the way the economy is, I expect there's going to be a lot of need for appeals. You have families where, let's say they're in the oil industry. I have a son who's in the oil industry and he's on 50% furlough. Well, if he had children that were college age, he doesn't, but that's going to be a factor. So the income for 2018 or 2019 look really good, but 2020 is not going to be the same story. So that would be something we would go back to the college and talk about that, and there are ways to lay that out. And that's one of the things I do, help people lay that out and make a convincing argument for a special consideration.
yes. This one's pretty specific. Is a pension income viewed or considered in the FAFSA or CSS profile as retirement savings or as income? Because I know we mentioned that retirement savings is not a part of the formula. But if there's a pension coming in, would that be considered income or retirement? Maybe for someone who's retired early.
So pension, let's say a pension from a corporation, pension from the government. So the estimated value of that is not, but the income is going to be. So let's say they get $1,000 a month from their pension. So that's going to be in their AGI, their adjusted gross income. So that will be included. But the valuation of that pension is not going to be in there. And I saw something the other day that if you're getting $2,000 a month in Social Security, given the low interest rates, to get an annuity that would pay that much, it would be like $750,000. Well, wow, that'd blow everyone's numbers right out of the water, right there. But it isn't just the income. So if they get $2,000 a year after, there's special considerations to how much it counts depending on their overall income level for Social Security. The net of the Social Security based on the tax calculation is going to be in the adjusted gross income, and that will be considered.
Okay. Okay, another, so you mentioned throughout the presentation, of course, meet early, plan early, do this stuff early. And I know that, like, all right, we're in 8th grade, my student's in 9th grade. Is that too early? Are we jumping the gun here? Or is that like the right time? Because of course, families with seniors right now, there's not much you can do. But if you are an 8th, 9th grade parent, what do you say about what's the timeline, your preferred timeline, Raymond, as far as meeting with families?
Yeah. Well, I meet with any family that wants to meet with me. But oftentimes I would get people, they've already, as I give an example, they've already filled out the FAFSA. They didn't like the result. And then they say, what can we do? And I'm like, oh my goodness. Well, there are a couple things we can do, but a whole bunch of things we could have done. It's too late for now. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's too late. So by the way, they're going to use the assets at the time that you fill out the form. They're going to use prior year for income, but they're going to use the assets as of the date that you finalize, say, your FAFSA. Okay. So as I said, the best case would be, you just got married and you're thinking of having a kid and you want to start planning. Well, not too many people do that, but definitely 8th grade, absolutely, because it won't be very long before you're going to run into the year that's going to be counted in the FAFSA and the CSS. So there's not a lot of extra time. So 8th grade would be actually a great time. And I've worked with families, and generally all the asset positioning and income things we had well under tow before they applied, and things were in beautiful condition. So that is a delightful time. But not that many people think of that, or they think, well, in a couple of years we'll start thinking about it, or junior year we'll start thinking about it. It's getting later and later. Doesn't mean you can't do anything, but it's, the earlier start, the much more opportunity to get a better result. And that's of course true academically. You don't want to wait until junior year and say, well, is the student interested in college, or what kind of aptitudes do they have? That's starting to get late in the game, but we help everybody. It's just how much flexibility we're going to have, and how much we can save them. And the earlier they start, absolutely, they do much better.
So Raymond, I'm going to take over the questions just because Claire's video is cutting out just a little bit. But just as a really quick specification on what you were just speaking about, can a junior, so families who are currently have a junior in high school, do they still have time to reposition assets or anything like that before this upcoming in October, financial aid time? If they started working with you today, would they still have time to make a difference? Let's call it that.
Yeah, generally, yes. Although sometimes there are things that people are doing in 8th grade, they're locking into something that may take a while to unravel or to move around a little bit. So the answer is yes. Generally doesn't work well when they're sitting in October of the year prior to admission in college, and they're saying, we got to have this in this week. That's much more limited in terms of what we can do. So yes, a junior, a family with a junior right now, this is certainly, I wouldn't wait too long. I sure wouldn't.
Okay. Just a really specific question. What about grandparents, going back to 529s, what about grandparents who have set up 529s for the kids? How is that counted?
Well, it is and it isn't. Okay. So it isn't a parental asset. It's not a student asset. It's a grandparent asset. But then if you start using it, then it comes into the equation and it's visible to the college. Okay. So I have some strategies that I use with people on that. So I'm more in favor of grandparents having them, but it's also how do you use them that makes a difference. And it also depends on how many years of college the student is going to be engaged in. Sometimes you don't know that right off bat. And there are also some other strategies with students that I think have proved very, very successful, ways of encouraging the student to graduate on time and to complete their degrees. So I like to talk to families, it's a larger family, not just the parents and the student, but also how are the grandparents, or let's say a rich aunt or uncle, playing into the equation, and who all is willing to help with college, and then work on a strategy so that the student still qualifies for the most financial aid, but maybe there's a way where those student loans are going to be worked down. And that's a real positive, because again, student loans, I run into people that say, we will never, ever get a student loan. Well, I can show them why that's not necessarily a good strategy, even though it's not good to owe a lot of money. But I'll give an example of a student who went into social work, and she had one of our clients, and she didn't make a lot of money. She goes to Goodwill to get her clothes and stuff and her furniture for her little apartment. She has a roommate to share expenses. She really likes social work, but she's working for a nonprofit. And so her student loans after 10 years of faithful payments will be forgiven. Now that's a great thing. And who knows, the federal government, don't necessarily count on this, but the federal government may make allowances to pay off student loans. So if you didn't get any student loans, you didn't get the opportunity to have them forgiven. And I've had students that, yes, went through and made their 10 years and their loans are forgiven. The remaining balance has been forgiven. And then I've had parents and families that say, it doesn't matter what college costs are, we'll just get loans. And then the student graduates, and there's a lot in student loans and a lot of in plus loans. And then they look at the income coming in and they're going, oh my goodness, this is a terrible burden. This is just oppressive. The student can't afford to get married or have a car or kids or anything because the payments are so high, and it'll be years before things sort out and the student can go ahead with other life plans. So either extreme can be very, very bad. And so people need to thoughtfully consider appropriate level of student loans in terms of a lot of other factors.
Thank you. Another question is, should a family business hire a child, put them on payroll? And I'll also expand on that a little and just say, beyond that question, how does student income, a high school student's income, impact their, financial aid?
Okay, so you've got some competing interests. In one case, let's say the family has a little business and they're thinking someday, one of the kids will end up managing the business and they want to get them experience. Now, if they do give them income, then that is counted, and it's counted more heavily than parental income in the formulas. Now, maybe they're not going to pay them a lot of money, so that may not be a big deal. But if they're going to pay them a lot of money, then yes, that's going to be subtracted pretty heavily from their financial aid. But on the other hand, this is one of those not easy to give an answer unless you look at all the family circumstances. On the other hand, maybe the job experience is very good. Maybe that'll help the student decide if they want to be the family member that's running the business afterwards. And they may decide, no, I don't want to do this. And that could be extremely helpful because maybe the student would change his or her major to something else that better fits their vocational plans. So it really, not just one factor, but generally student income and student assets are counted more heavily than parental income and parental assets. But that does not mean a student should not have a job. Student, that might be helpful. And in some cases, it's not going to make a big difference in their financial aid. But all those factors we would look at to see what's an optimal strategy.
Okay. Someone posted, I am assuming that even the international assets or overseas investments will need to be mentioned. Can you please confirm, and should we reposition them in any way for the CSS or FAFSA?
Yes and yes.
All right. Yes and yes. And I'm actually going to ask my own question about international is, Raymond, are you able to help international students coming to the U.S. or vice versa, U.S. students going internationally with that financial aid and financial positioning?
Well, I guess if they're going to an international college, FAFSA and CSS may not be relevant unless it's like a branch of U.S. college, I would guess. But yes, I do work with international students, and a lot of times they're the ones that want to have the bigger package than I do with more hours, because I've sat down with a number of them and we're right there on the little personal computer and we're banging the numbers in. We're converting from, one currency into another currency. And yes, and generally international students will want that kind of help because they're navigating a different culture, a different financial system, and the records, etc. to try to be apples and apples with US-based students.
Okay. Next question is what is taken into account with merit aid? Because institutional aid is considered the #1 way to bring down the total, cost of tuition, is the aid that comes from colleges, merit aid. So what are they looking at from the merit aid perspective?
Okay, so merit aid is technically not based on your need. That is the need in terms of financial need or assets or how much cash you have to help pay for college. So merit aid is basically that. So it's maybe your test scores, your SAT, ACT, your high school grades, special skills and abilities that you bring to the table that you get merit aid for. However, as I noted, many colleges require you to fill out your FAFSA and CSS in order to be eligible even for merit aid. And that's sort of strange, but that's just the way it rolls. So if you're a very wealthy family and yet at the same time you have a really talented student, you probably still want to fill out the FAFSA and CSS profile in order to be eligible for the merit aid. Doesn't totally make sense. Just like the tax code doesn't have to make sense, it just has to be the rule. So I almost always recommend people fill it out. And sometimes I've had families that didn't fill it out, but then they realized what they gave up, and then sophomore year in college, they ended up filling out the FAFSA and in order to get some merit aid that they could have gotten for the freshman year. I mean, they don't get it retrospectively, but at least they get it for maybe the sophomore and junior year.
And I do want to clarify to all listeners that some of these questions are coming in, publicly, privately, but for merit aid, yes, your consultants, we do know what merit aid is, but it is helpful, again, to hear it from someone who's working kind of on from a different perspective, a different side of things. And so we want to make sure that you're hearing that information reaffirmed and confirmed from different sources.
Let me say something. We've had families we've worked with and they say, well, our daughter is a fantastic basketball player. And we expect that we're going to do really well. She's like top of the league or whatever, most valuable player. And we just know that all the colleges are going to give her a full ride and we won't have to set aside any money whatsoever. I'm exaggerating a little bit for college because she's such a good basketball player. And we had a consultant working with us for a number of years, and he sort of specialized in athletes and colleges and financial aid for them. And it's really like 0.5% of the current sports players that ever get that kind of help. And many times it's not a full scholarship either. It may be a discount, certain amount off of tuition for being on the sports team. And oftentimes too, it's just for the big sports where there are a lot of people sitting in seats like basketball and football. If you're on the tennis team, you can be a fantastic tennis player, but oftentimes you're not going to get that much in scholarship, even if you're invited to play on the team. However, that might get you into the school you want to get into, so that would be great. But it's not a good planning strategy to say, we have this fantastic athlete and we just know we're going to get a full ride. Does happen. We've had people in the Olympics that were, but they're, 1 in 100,000 students maybe.
For scholarships, speaking of scholarships and like athletic scholarships and different types, another parent had asked me, can you speak a little about scholarship search options? Because there are some, big ones that are free, like FastWeb, Google, there's also ones you can pay a subscription to. So tell me a little bit about your opinion and knowledge of scholarship search options, like websites.
Well, I list those Personally, I don't use those a lot, but I do list them so that parents can go on there and fill them out. And generally, if they're asking you to pay a lot of money, that's probably something to avoid, because understand, there are people in it just to make a lot of money off of you. So they'll say, hey, if you give us, $5,000, we'll get you some scholarships. I would probably run for the exits if someone offers a deal like that. So there are some free web-based, there's a number of them, and I'll list them on my consultant report that I give the families. But most of the aid, which is Claire and you allude to, is going to be institutional based. What does that mean? It's going to be the college that you go to is going to offer most of the financial aid. And that's really the first place we go. And so therefore we want to be well positioned. We want to be well positioned in terms of academics and special skills and talents of the student, and then financial positioning and income and how that all comes together for a nice package and the optimal result. So most of it's institutional based, although certainly if a student is getting no financial aid and the family needs some money, yeah, you want to try all the little avenues that you can outside of the college. Here's a dirty little secret. Sometimes you get a scholarship from somebody else. The college is aware of that and they subtract that from what they're going to give you. So I hate to tell people that, but it's the truth. You can spend a lot of time getting scholarships and they say, oh, that's wonderful. You got a $5,000 scholarship from Pillsbury Corporation. And that means $5,000 of the Regents Scholarship Fund we don't have to give you because you got that one. And you said, but I worked so hard. I did all these essays. And I had to give a speech. And they say, well, that's nice. It's probably a good experience, but there's $5,000 we don't have to give you out of our kitty.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and pause the questions. Thank you so much, Raymond. I have posted your contact information in the chat box. And again, we're going to be sending out this recording to everybody with your information. And another thing that we will be including in that email and that I'd like to mention is our podcast that we've just started. The next topic that we'll be speaking about is financial aid. And again, it'll help give a little bit more information about financial aid help from the Bright Futures side of things. And that link to the podcast will be, again, in the email, and we'll be doing bi-monthly podcasts aimed towards parents of high school students about the college admissions process. And I want to, again, clarify to everyone that Raymond is, our trusted partner in this, in financial consulting, financial advising. He's been with Dr. Denard and worked with her and Bright Futures for years. And, we've always had clients say good things about working with him. We do remain informed as your college consultants. We do remain informed about financial aid, about, the new things that are happening with the forms, what colleges are looking for in terms of merit. In fact, I would say that tends to be more of our focus and specialty, is how much research we do on what colleges are looking for in terms of merit aid. That's why we spend so much time talking about summer planning and bugging students during coronavirus time to say, hey, reach out, try and volunteer, do these things. It's not because we just don't want you to, relax or not catch up with schoolwork, but we want to make sure that you're remaining well placed for merit aid. However, when it comes to how your family's personal finances are going to impact that financially need-based aid, that's where Raymond's knowledge and expertise comes in. We have a general, knowledge about how it's calculated, how a school might, address that. But as far as repositioning assets or doing any kind of advising, we're always going to refer you to Raymond, because that's, again, just not our area of expertise, and we only advise on what we're experts in. So thank you again so much for all of you joining us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to, again, email Raymond with specific questions. He'll be more than happy to, get in contact with you. And if you have any questions as far as college advising or college admissions, just, get a hold of your consultant, or if it's, if you're new and you're not working with us yet, just reach out to us. Our website is brightfuturesllc.com. And again, everyone, enjoy your Sunday, stay safe, and stay healthy.